Whoa. Can they go a bit softer before you kill me? Brilliant. Thank you. I look like this, but I might have to do that sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Go a bit Roy Orbison for you. How are you? You're doing really well. You're all right. You look like, who are you? And where did you come from? Do you know, it's lovely to be here. I always get choked up at the beginning of a festival, you know, when you haven't quite met everyone in the space. It's an absolute privilege to be here and to be invited, you know, because sometimes I have to gate crash. This feels a little bit too school-marmy, doesn't it? Where's that dingy-ding thing where I move the slides on? Come on, you're slacking. While we're doing that, is everybody comfortable? Because if you haven't got your creature comforts met, there's space enough to move around and find it, you know? There's room for us all in here. Thank you. Yes. Thanks a lot. Anything could happen now. I decided to call my opener, and I didn't know I was doing the opener of the whole symposium, so anything could happen now. And to be absolutely clear, I'm not an academic. You might rumble that very swiftly, so let's fess up. I'm an activist. I've always been an activist. I was born in a family of rebels. My father's Catholic and my mother is Protestant, Irish. And from the part of the country they came from, it was not due to consort with each other, let alone run away and have 5 bastard children, of which I'm pig in the middle. And so I always had to squeal loudest to be heard. And so I was raised with a certain amount of political aggression, not necessarily awareness. And we fought the war around the dinner table. But I was raised in a very happy, unusual family full of disabled people, of which I'm very happily bang in the middle. And I've been mad, they say, allegedly, since the age of, well, I think 12, the social workers started coming into the family. They'd been identified by the school, the educational psychologists. So it's great, I can't see you now, but to meet a political psych in the room. I'll find you again. Hooray, it's great to see you again. And I know we were on the same panel in Melbourne, and I'll remember when, before the day is dead. Somebody asked me earlier on, where are you from? And I think that's an interesting question, isn't it, when you're exploring identity. Am I from that chaotic beginning? That's your first template, isn't it? Your family, your tribe. But you know what? They're not my chosen tribe. Where am I from? Yeah, I'm Irish, recovering Catholic. We were refused baptism anyway, and I was never allowed into a proddy dog church. That is so culturally specific, you won't know what I mean. All I'm saying is, my chosen tribe sits right here. We breathe together the fire in the belly of international family of cousins as disabled people. And before we part company in a few days' time, I know we'll breathe that fire together much more strongly. And right now, we need it. Because whether you're here on this continent or back home in Ireland, and I would say a big shout out to the festival in Northern Ireland, I saw you tweeting before. Thank you to Bounce Festival. Thank you also to Outburst. Thank you also to Picture This in Canada. And the rest of you I've forgotten. Get angry with me and tweet like mad, and then we'll keep going. I think it was Adam Reynolds that once said, "We are a family of cousins." And I love that because it embraces the whole higgledy-piggledy mess of us as human beings together, whatever our impairments or conditions are. Today, I wanted to talk about Unruly Minds Unleashed because I got this great commission a couple of years ago from the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries based at Leicester University. They usually only commission academics, but they took a big risk. 2 years ago, they chose 4 artists, and they had to be disabled artists, and they preferred those artists to be activists. So I had the great privilege of being one of them. I'm not sure if they regret that to this day. But I have to look at the artists who've had a great influence on me. And I'm going to choose two of them to have a look at together. Because one of them, you may well know her, but you may not know her art. Her name is Alison Lapper. I love the work of Alison Lapper. And this is in her early days, in her punky years. This is over 20 years ago, when she started doing Beauty Out of Damage. Now, we could sit here and argue, was that really your sense of yourself damaged? Or are you playing with the minds of the others who are othering us, describing us as damaged? You know what? I'll leave that with the academics. You analyse that. Her work is superb. She always used her body as the focus, turning the power of the gaze right back on the voyeur. Incredibly sexy, incredibly feisty. I mean, it really doesn't matter if you're on my side of the sexual interests to look at this body and perceive her as utterly beautiful. Mark Quinn noticed, didn't he? This is from a beautiful piece that Alison Lapper was exploring her own relationships and her sexual identity. And this was taken during a series of images after she'd parted from her partner, Frank. And she's talked about it very openly, about the moment when she actually bit his shoulder and knew in that moment she had been afraid until she seized power. And in that moment, he became frightened of her and switched it round. But after that, she couldn't trust him any longer. And she made this piece of work out of that moment, which was ultimately about domestic violence inside their relationship. I always respect her, and I love her for being so public and so open about that, because I think we very rarely speak out about those power imbalances inside our relationships behind closed doors. Then came Mark Quinn. Now, I'm deeply conflicted about this statue. Am I blocking you? Can you see through me? I love it. You can see through me. It's great. Mark Quinn did a series of, I would say, some of them are beautiful, some of them are really awkward and kind of too on the edge of Roll Out the Freak Show. And you know where I'm going when I say that. You know, who's got the power of the gaze? But Mark Quinn got this massive funding, the commission for the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, one of the biggest heritage sites, I would argue, in the world. And I'm not being kind of, oh, I'm imperialist, you know, our squares are better than your squares. I'm saying we're talking Trafalgar Square, you know, where the Queen is just a toss away. And I mean a toss. So Mark Quinn made this one in 2004. It created a furore, I kid you not. And I picked out only some of the responses to the work immediately. He made work about Matt Fraser, Catherine Long, and in fact made a statue with the two of them called The Kiss, which was a sort of, I wish I had an image of that one, but I haven't got that one with me. I'll have to tell you about it, though. It's a statue of Matt and Catherine literally embracing, and it's almost like remembering Rodin, The Kiss. Although I'd argue it's far more interesting because both of the bodies in that moment of the kiss obviously have very different physicalities than your usual Grecian classical, boringly symmetrical. Sorry to say, loaded, but I'm in favour of my family of cousins. Now, I was working in London Disability Arts Forum at that time, directing a film festival, the Disability Film Festival down the South Bank. And I was also one of the assessors inside the Arts Council. Once you're inside a machinery like that, you make your compromises work for you. Thin end of the wedge. So any disabled artists who are looking for funding, I would try my best to swing it their way, do you know what I mean? Alongside a whole team of us. I'm not engaged anymore, I got kicked off, but you can see why, really. Mark got this massive funding at the same time as Alison Lapper had applied for her own funding to create the body Venus. I think that was the draft title of that piece of work, which was looking at why was the Venus de Milo perceived as utterly beautiful and her body was not. And she wanted to turn that on its head. Then came Mark Quinn. Mark Quinn, non-disabled, white, probably heterosexual. I haven't explored that, I don't know. But you know what? Probably WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Here we go again. Who's got the power in their hands? Who gets the funding? Who gets their voice out there in the biggest heritage site, arguably, in the world? One of them, anyway. Bold, brave, beautiful, Rachel Cook said at The Observer. Trafalgar Square, said the Daily Mail. Who else? There's been a number of people who've written extensively about Mark Quinn's work. We've heard from, here we go. I regard this as a modern tribute to femininity, disability, and motherhood. That's Alison's personal statement. But we had other people saying, this vulgar representation of freakdom shouldn't be here in the centre of our city. Lapper said later, you know, people who are negative about these statues are the ones with the problem. I think it gives a very powerful message about disability and motherhood and femininity and being a woman. I embrace that as a feminist, unashamed feminist. Lapper says she hoped the sculpture would make a difference. It is inspirational. It puts disability and femininity and motherhood on the map. Time to challenge people's perceptions of these things. But it only took 2 years later when Alison said, it's done me no favours as an artist. Mark Quinn's work eclipsed Alison Lapper as an artist. She's coming back to the fore, by the way. Only 3 years ago, she was made a doctorate of the University in Brighton. After she gave birth to Paris, her son, who is now 17, her work suddenly became much more colourful, much more fluid, vibrant, and she refers back to the earlier work that she did about domestic violence behind those walls. Her work became exciting, fluid, dynamic, and now, using Mark Quinn's publicity, she was able to charge more. This is why I'm conflicted about the statue. I think it's done its work in lots of ways in terms of challenging people's perceptions. But I know that Alison Lapper didn't get the funding for her own work, and she's found it really difficult to get funding ever since, which blows my mind. Alison's last word, my greatest piece of artwork and creation is her relationship with her son, Paris. Now, whatever you feel about motherhood and the business of raising children, I think right now, childhood and childcare shapes the future. And we're going to need to listen to our young ones, because I cannot believe, for the first time, my 2 nieces came out to vote. I was celebrating because I thought all of that stuff about the suffragettes, you know, I'd plugged it and they've got it, they've absolutely understood it. And they both voted Brexit. Swallow that one. That one on the left there with the image of the pink arms refers back to an earlier series of Alison's work where she's looking at her support workers, her personal assistants, and looking at that slightly disconnected way that your body experiences other support and help around you. Actually, I was looking at Robert Andy Coombs' work on the web last night. Fantastic stuff. And which is in the gallery next door to Rivalera at the moment. So go and have a look at the images. Literally putting himself in the centre of that work and surrounded by support workers in various, they're not necessarily support workers, they're probably friends, I don't know, they're all lovers, who knows? But it's that stuff about being physically supported, cared for, etc., in the context of the centre of your life. It's a really interesting image. Have a look anyway. You've got plenty of time to browse. I now want to look at Aidan Shingler. Aidan has moved my life dramatically. He refuses the word disability nowadays. Absolutely, it's a really interesting one. He's a refuser. And yet in his earlier years, he was at the heart of the disability arts movement. He spent his whole life repositioning labels and shifting away from the way others have labeled him as somebody who's been positioned as schizophrenic. He created a lovely film called The Artist's Guide to Schizophrenia and calls himself a reality tester. So I'm kind of spilling his reality testing you right now. The one on the left is called 1 in 100, referring to the statistics of people positioned as schizophrenic in our communities. The one on the right, Beyond Reason. That one, we had to challenge the Hayward Gallery because they stole his title. We went down there as a mob of disabled activists and artists. They had to take the title down because Aidan Shingler got there first. That was going to be another moment of eclipsing one of our artists for the sake of what? Another white, middle-class, able-bodied artist with funding at the Hayward. On the left, Head Case. This was part of an exhibition called Only Smarties Have the Answer. What I love about Aidan's work is he uses the populist kind of signemes and images that are used like ubiquitous messages around the streets and on the sidings of buses or in the magazines, every one you open. And he uses them and plays with them. So the exhibition we had at Diorama Gallery, Aidan was there at the beginning with a whole tray of Smarties, but he'd taken them out their boxes. Now, Only Smarties Have the Answer was a kind of slogan, a jingle that was on television at the time. So when people arrived at his exhibition, he offered them Smarties. But because they knew who Aidan was, and because he'd been labeled as schizophrenic, a lot of people refused to touch what they were being offered. It's an interesting moment. And the rest of us went, oh, for hell, whatever it is, come on, I'm on for the journey. I want what he's on. That exhibition was beautiful, and one of the things that challenged me, and I thought was brilliant because it challenged the drugs industry, was an image that, actually it wasn't an image, it was a series of images. I'm trying to remember what he called it, but it was in the context of Only Smarties Have the Answer. And there were 12 white frames, and inside each frame there was a carefully made little dicky bow that was made out of surgical bandage. And he had pinned each bandage that looked like a butterfly with a little pin with a red end on it, like a little droplet of blood. And underneath was the name of each psychiatrist who had diagnosed him over the years. And underneath that was the name of the drug that they prescribed willy-nilly. And then underneath that was the part of the drugs industry they were connected to. Touché, mon cher. Aidan, I know you're tuning in. Keep me on it. He then created the Kiss It campaign for all those of us who have been seized under 136 sections, which is a section of the Mental Health Act where the police, for God's sake, are given the powers to detain us without any training in crisis support, crisis intervention. And the Kiss It campaign was to draw attention to 4-point restraint, which is a really damaging experience. I don't know whether anybody here has been through it. I have. I've been taken off in handcuffs and ankle restraints, and then they give you the needle up the bum. So a lot of us marched out with placards, some of us with our arses hanging out just in case they needed to be ready to get us, and we called it the Kiss It campaign. Well, let's make it easier, you know. Cut to the chase. You want my arse? This is what it looks like. This is one of his best works. Now, it may look like nothing to you. I have to tell you where it was. This is the only image of it. It was funded by the Wellcome Trust, which is, I love it, it was funded by the Wellcome Trust. They gave him 3,000 quid to make a piece of work that was in the headquarters in the foyer of their space on Euston Road, right in the centre of London. And he called it Thirst for Life. It was on a marble plinth which was like a pyramid, and above it was a kind of drawn-out triangle reflecting the power of that pyramid and all things triangle. And on top of the plinth was this little flask with yellow liquid inside. And bang in the middle of that triangle, there was this kind of plumb line descended from it, fixed to the ceiling. And, you know, it looked kind of, well, that's all right. Didn't move me. I thought, 3,000 quid for that? You must be joking. But I was stood next to Alan Sutherland, who was writing for Disability Arts Online. Hello, Disability Arts Online. I know you're tuning in too, to Colin Hambrook and Joe Turnbull. Alan Sutherland, I have no doubt you're there as well. I'll never forget this moment. So he turned round and Alan goes, "What are those Latin words underneath there, Aidan?" And Aidan said, "Oh, it means extracting the urine." And Alan went, "So you're taking the piss?" That was what was in the flask, of course. Aidan's own body fluids. I would say I'm only here to exchange ideas today, not body fluids, but I'm on Aidan's side. Nowadays, Aidan has fundraised over £750,000 to create one of the biggest heritage sites in the north of England. This is in the Derbyshire Vales. It's called Stardisc. It is a massive construction on the size of Stonehenge. It's now visited by tourists all over the north. And what I love about it is the culmination of Aidan's work, his life's work. It's at the end of a little tourist walkway called the Pathway to the Stars. And this star disc has 13 seats. They are essentially the waiting space for the star children that Aidan's been talking about all of his life. And can I just say, they will come for us one day, and they will take us back. But thank God, or whoever's around, whatever power brought me here, including Aidan, I've been chosen as one of the star children. So if those naff people that fingerprinted me 3 times at Washington Airport on Monday and did the flash photography in my face and frisked me twice, if they don't take me away, the aliens are coming. I know where I'm going. That's Aidan Shingle on the right-hand side, and that there, you can barely see the little lights underneath, the planets that are carefully engraved in that star disk. It's a beautiful piece of work, and what's wonderful, and I think this is Aidan's probably greatest achievement, I'd say, is he got all that funding and everybody to believe him, and not once did he say, and by the way, this is where the aliens are going to take me home one day. Awkward Bastards. Wonderful conference. They've just had their second conference, which is in Birmingham, but it's run by Dash, Disability Arts in Shropshire. They're about to move on to their 3rd event in 2 years' time. We've literally just folded this one. But I was identified as an awkward bastard many years ago. I'm pretty sure that's why I've been sectioned under the Mental Health Act too often for my liking. And part of the commission I talked about earlier, which was given from the Research Centre of Museums and Galleries, Leicester University, they gave me 2 years, well, actually it was 18 months if we're honest, to explore 8 collections in 8 medical museums around the UK. I had a field day. But one of my favourite things that I found in the research and in the investigations was this massive puppet. He's about 15 feet tall, and he was made by a guy called James Henry Pullen, who'd been put away for his entire life. He was described as an idiot savant. I've gone carefully through the medical notes, and I would argue he's probably deaf. It's written there that he had a communication disorder and that he had behavioural problems. I would have behavioural problems if you locked me away for my whole life. Watch this space. But the man was a superb carpenter, self-taught, and an incredible mechanical engineer. This puppet here, which I know it says, please do not touch the exhibit, that's why I had to get in and hug it, its head swivels right round on this tiny little track of ball bearings. This guy built this in 1853. He was put away as an idiot for his entire life. What are they saying about people who are self-taught? What kind of magical skills are we locking away inside our lock-in spaces? James Henry Pullen was an extraordinary human, let me tell you. And I fell in love with him, and I fell in love with this puppet. So we just got the funding to make a replica. And guess what? We've now been invited to march through the Olympic Park with our puppet, and the puppet will lead the cavalcade of the oppressed. And guess who that's going to be? All of yous and your cousins. We're all coming out over the park. This is my very last slide for this moment today. Thank you very much for having me. I hope there's nobody out there in white coats about to seize me, but I'll say this. The piece of work that I wrote, finally, culminating in that 18 months research, was a piece called Hold the Hearse. So called because the ethical dilemmas in the pickled jars that were hidden behind those secure doors and those, what do they call them, key-coded patches before you can get through. My God, yeah, that. There were so many rows of disabled children in jars, disabled babies with different shapes. The thing that distressed me most was those specimens were the only ones with no paperwork attached. No names, no homes, as if they had no mothers, no fathers, no belonging, no space, no place to be. That needs addressing more than anything. And bang in the middle of there, I was looking for a being there that had what? Hydrocephalus and spina bifida. It was my older sister's diagnosis. The doctors had taken that baby from my mother's arms and set it aside and said, let nature take its course. And she wasn't allowed to touch her own child or cradle that girl in her arms. All she knew was, I had a girl child, I was never allowed to touch her. And so at the heart of that piece of work, with the help of Terry Galloway, bang in the front, and Donna Marie Nudd right beside her, dramaturgs and director, although we're not allowed to say that in public because, you know, we weren't supposed to be paying them. However, I've just said it now on live stream. Come and get me. At the heart of that piece of work, I retold my mother's story, and I reclaimed that child in the pickle jar and named her Josephine. Josephine Patricia, born 18th of May, 1958. And every day of my life I remember that, because what happened to my mother at the age of 18 reverberates down 3 generations. To this day, we won't let our kids go to the doctors, not without a great deal of fuss. Comrades, family, friends, see you later. Thanks for having me. There's more to come.